Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Boiler Track Show, a show by Boiler Upload of the Rivals Network. And today we are being joined for the second time by Bobby Buckets himself, color commentator for Purdue Men's Basketball Radio. Bob, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. Excited to talk some boiler ball.
Yes, sir. Of course. Whenever you want to come on, you're always welcome. You know that. So obviously, right off the bat, Purdue's coming off a tough loss against Indiana and Bloomington. Just what were some of your takeaways from that game being there?
Yeah, it's tough coming off a loss, right? You start to get into that habit of just like we play and then we win,
Uh-huh.
and then we enjoy the fruits of those victories. So yeah, it's definitely a bummer, of course, losing that game, especially when you lose to your rival like that. But it was a tough place to play at. As everyone knows, Assembly Hall, it was a great environment there. And when you have the number one team in the country and your arch rival coming to the building, you would expect that the environment's going to be off the charts and that the team Indiana is going to play with their hair on fire and bring a lot of energy, which they did from the start. And it definitely caused us some issues there as far as like handling their pressure. They did a really good job, you know, forcing our offense to operate from further out in the court than we're comfortable with, and that we're as effective at. And we're not a team that's got a whole lot of guys necessarily who are great at putting the ball on the floor and like creating plays. And so that strategy of really getting out there and pressuring, especially if the officials will allow you to pressure and not call fouls, that's going to be an effective strategy at times against us. And of course, they forced a lot of turnovers in that first half. And that first half with the 11 turnovers and the number of breakaway baskets they're able to get, and just the lack of opportunities we get on the offensive end from either a shot standpoint or an offensive
Yeah.
rebound standpoint, considering how good we are at offensive rebounding. You build that 15-point halftime deficit, and that ends up just being too much to overcome. But I think there were some really positive takeaways as far as how we, went into halftime, regrouped, came back in the second half, and really took it to them there for the majority of that second half. Um, it was unfortunate that the lead was too big to overcome. Got it down to one at one point, but just couldn't quite make enough plays down the stretch to win. But I think the fact that we showed a lot of resolve and got some great learning experience for our young guards to go through something like that, I think is just going to make us, better for down the road, because we're not going to play in a more hostile environment than that the rest of the season. So
Yeah, no doubt. And how concerned are you? I mean, we've seen with Indiana and then in the other loss this season against Rutgers, the big guards obviously had an impact on Purdue's guards. Just how concerned are you about that moving forward for Purdue?
well, I think that's a concern for any team, honestly. I mean, big athletic guards who can move on the perimeter and have active hands, like they're going to give any team issues.
Mm,
And of course, when they play with a whole lot of intensity and energy because they're backed by a hostile crowd, that's going to make them even better. And if they get usually when you're playing an environment like that as the home team, you're going to get a friendlier whistle. You can be more physical on the perimeter, and you won't get as many of those touch fouls. So all those things worked in Indiana's favor and against Purdue, but that's just life on the road in the Big Ten. And yeah, I mean, that's going to be something that for any team, but certainly Purdue, if you face a team that's got really athletic perimeter defenders that can force, Purdue likes to run a lot of those set plays and, get into their actions and then throw the ball inside. Well, one of the ways to not allow Zach to get the ball is to pressure those guards enough to push them out further enough out on the floor that they aren't able to feel comfortable throwing an inbounds pass, or if they try to throw an inbounds pass from too far away, it can get stolen, so on and so forth. So that's definitely a concern. I mean, I would say just like for any team, but certainly Purdue, that playing a team that's really good man-to-man pressure defense is something that Purdue is going to have to be on their A game to handle.
yeah, no doubt. And you've mentioned that atmosphere a few times. What do people not understand about the Indiana Purdue rivalry and playing in those insane atmospheres that I mean you really can't even explain unless you're there playing in it.
Right, no question. It's just bonkers. Like you're just sitting there and you're just kind of like myself. I'm sitting there. I'm just kind of like looking around, soaking it all in, because that's just what makes the gig I get to do so special. Is these road environments are really fun to be in, especially the way Purdue has been the last handful of years, being a top 10 team oftentimes, and we're getting most of these teams are bringing their best crowd for us.
Nah.
And IU, of course, is going to be no different from that standpoint. And so, it's just really fun. It's what makes college basketball so special, right? Like, you don't get that type of environment in the NBA, for instance. Like, that is hostile. Like, they're out to get you. And, you can feed off of that, right? The home crowd's feeding, or the home team is feeding off that with the positive energy. And, the road team sometimes is able to feed off that as far as like trying to silence the crowd, things of that nature. But it's really fun. And what makes college basketball so great is being in an environment like that. But when, when the home team gets a little success and the crowd gets going, like, they can really, it's amazing how, even though it's just still basketball and it's still 94 feet or whatever, they can speed you up. The crowd and the intensity and everything, it can speed you up as a player and maybe make you do something that's uncharacteristic. And of course, a lot of that has to do with not only the crowd, but the defense that is thriving off that energy and flying around. So, yeah, it was a really fun environment to be in. I'm looking forward, of course, to us being able to return the favor in Mackey, because Mackey's going to be off the charts as well when that game comes around.
Yeah, most definitely. And it felt, I mean, just watching on TV, and obviously I wasn't there. I didn't see it up close and personal, but it looked to me like Purdue kind of tried to go into Bloomington business as usual in the first section of the game, and then Indiana was acting like it was their Final Four, like they were juiced up, and it felt like I don't know what's your thoughts on that? Because for me, it did look like Purdue was trying to go in there and have a level head in it. They just got sped up, like you kind of mentioned.
For sure. I think it's interesting because basically the same exact story unfolded for us in the first half last year in that game and in the first half this year. And, last year's team, even though we had a lot of experience, a lot of those guys hadn't played at Indiana in front of a crowd like that in a while, or ever. Jaden Ivey hadn't ever, Sasha and Eric hadn't in a couple of years because of COVID and stuff. So, like, you go in that thinking like, okay, business as usual. It's another road game. We got to be locked in. But then you get hit with like the intensity and energy of that IU crowd in a rivalry game that's different than any other road game you face that year. Let's just be honest. Like, it's a different deal. And the home team is inspired as all get out to try to get the win. And it's just a different animal than what you've seen before. And so, like, this year's team has young guards. They haven't played in this environment. Even a guy like Ethan Morton, who's played in it last year, like, didn't play a bunch of minutes necessarily. Like, it's just a whole different deal than a lot of the other road environments. And so, like, I don't know this for a fact, of course, but like you and I were hypothesizing, maybe those guys go into the game thinking, okay, business as usual, just like these other road games we played. And then it just doesn't end up being the same as every road game you played. And it unfortunately, just like last year, took us a half to like take a deep breath and settle into the game. And of course, in both instances, it turned out to be too much to overcome.
Now, I mean, during your broadcasting career, you've seen a few court stormings. What's that? I mean, just to start, what's that like being down there and then seeing all those kids running down on the court? What's that like?
Yeah,
I know it's probably tough in a
that.
loss. I know it's probably tough in a loss, but
Right. No, I mean, I love college basketball. I love all that stuff. So, like, the court storms are great. I hate that it's at our expense, of course, but it is a backhanded compliment or whatever to us, saying like, if you're going to rush the court on us, that means you think it was pretty awesome to beat us, of course. So that is nice to have that happen, I suppose. If you're going to lose, have that sort of respect for your program. But yeah, I think I saw like maybe 5 of our last 6 losses in Big Ten play have had courts stormed or something like that, dating back to last year, which is just wild because, yeah, it's kind of become the norm. Like, on the road, I have to go down to the Purdue locker room and get Coach Painter for a post game interview for the radio show, and it's become like an adventure for me, like Mission Impossible. How do I make it to the locker room, in a reasonable time period to get his interview done and on the show while having to maneuver around court storms? Like, it's crazy. Like, my first ever post game interview with Coach Paint was the Rutgers game last year. Because
Oh,
on the home games, Rob Blackman just handles it because Coach
mhm.
Painter puts on a radio set in the Purdue locker room, and then Rob just handles it. But on the road games, Rob has to handle the rest of the post game show, going through the statistics, doing some other stuff for the post game show, and so I get sent to the Purdue locker room to get an interview with Paint. And so the first time I'd ever done it was the Rutgers game last year when Harper hits the half quarter.
Mm.
And I as I'm trying to get down to the floor and get back to the locker room, I'm just like, holy cow, this is insane. What am I going to ask Coach Painter about? Obviously it's a stressful, high intensity loss. So all that was working through my head. But now I'm a seasoned vet at just having to interview Paint after we lose in some crazy, heartbreaking fashion where the fans storm the court. So yeah, it's pretty wild.
Yeah, and I know Purdue fans on Twitter and things like that, they're going to be upset about the court stormings, but like you said, it is kind of a compliment for the program. And then I look at it, maybe it's just because I'm young, but I mean, they're a bunch of drunk 18 to 22-year-olds. What do you expect? You know what I mean? So I don't.
No, I mean, if you beat the number one team in the country,
Yeah.
isn't it an obligation you storm the court? I don't care who, if it's your rival or whatever. Like, if you beat the number one team in the country, you storm the court. Let's just come on. That's kids
Yeah,
having fun, in my opinion. But everybody's got their own opinion on the matter. So
yeah. And then I was trying to think back. I don't know if I've ever seen Purdue storm the court. I know they did for football, in recent years, but
we actually did when I was a player.
did you really?
Yeah. My junior year, Robbie, Hummel, and Etuan and Joan, all those guys were the baby Boilers as freshmen, and Wisconsin was like a top 10 team, definitely top 10. And because they ended up winning the league, that they won the Big Ten that year, we got second. And their only two losses in the Big Ten play were to us. We beat them twice. No one else in the Big Ten could beat them, and we lost to the Big Ten by one game to them, which was infuriating. It was like, can no one else beat Wisconsin? So they win the league. They were top 10, came into our building. Robbie Hummel gets a block in the final seconds to preserve the win, and the students rushed the court. It was insane. Like, they were jumping over that big balcony or whatever where the scoreboards, those little side scoreboards are at.
Mm.
And I run out in the court to embrace Hummel. And it was crazy because as I'm running out to him, all I could see over his shoulder was a stampede of students. And so as I embraced him, we got embraced, but it was actually pretty unbelievable moment. Yeah. But that's the only time I can think of it happening.
I don't know why. I don't know why I forgot about that. Well, that was when I was like 5 or
You were
6.
pretty little.
Yeah, I was 5 or 6, I think.
Maybe this would have
even
been the 07, 08 season.
yeah, so I was like 6, 7 around there. So that's why I forgot,
Yeah.
but that is awesome.
You're probably in bed already, dude.
Probably. But yeah, I mean, that atmosphere is something that I think everybody has to experience, that Indiana Purdue rivalry. Because I mean, say what you want, it's up there with the Duke UNC and all the great college basketball and college football rivalries. Indiana Purdue is up at the top. So
no question.
And I mean, moving forward, I mean, what are you looking for in terms of how this team responds to a loss?
Sure, and I think this game Thursday is a big one, right? Because you get punched in the mouth at Indiana, you rally back, but you're not quite able to get it done, and now you got to be able to respond. You got to come back home and defend home turf, and take on an Iowa team that's really talented. Chris Murray and the rest of those boys, they can really score the basketball. So you're going to have to be really locked in from a personnel standpoint and from a defensive game plan standpoint to slow these guys down. Obviously, got to make sure you take care of the basketball. They're probably going to apply some pressure full court, I would think, whether it's aggressive or token. I would imagine they'll do it to some degree since that's what they do to a lot of teams. And they can really, with their length and stuff, can get active. We've seen Purdue struggle with some of that pressure I was presented in the past. So, yeah, we got to make sure we take care of the basketball, because if you turn it over against them, that's a recipe for disaster with how good they are offensively. And that's probably going to be the key to the game, honestly. I would imagine if Purdue's able to keep the turnovers 12 and under, going to have a great chance to win. If it gets over 12, it's going to get dicey. So I'll be really interested to see, how we come out. And how we bounce back from this game. But there's only 7 Big Ten games left. You got a 3-game lead in the conference standing, so it's right there in front of you to try to go out there, win a couple more here in a row, and try to clinch this Big Ten title.
And they got a sneaky tough little stretch coming up too. At or after the Iowa game, at Northwestern, at Maryland, and then Indiana again, I believe, all in a row.
Ohio State at home, and
State.
then Indiana at home.
That's a tough little stretch.
Yeah, and then we got Illinois at home. We got at Wisconsin. After that, it's at Wisconsin, then and then home against Illinois to finish. So this is probably the most difficult stretch of the season as far as quality of games in the Big Ten for us. I think when you start with that Indiana game on the road, these last 8 games we had were probably the most difficult stretch, I would say, as far as the quality of opponent. And yeah, so we're gonna have to bring our A game here down the stretch if we want to be able to wrap up this Big Ten title.
Yeah, most definitely. And I'll be interested to see how they deal with the Northwestern defense, who's kind of come out.
They're really guarding.
They've come out of nowhere. They've been playing really well this year.
Yeah, they're really guarding this year. They had a new assistant coach added to their staff this year who coached at Southern Illinois, I believe, with Coach Painter. Lowry, I think is his last name. I think he's really brought some a good addition from a defensive standpoint to their program, maybe different philosophies, working well with Coach Collins to kind of revamp that defense. And they're really flying around. I feel like their strategy on that end of the floor has been really solid. And Chase Audige and some of their personnel, of course, have helped that. Chase Audige is a really good defender, active hands. Robbie Barron's, I think, an underrated defender, long, can move his feet pretty well at that power forward spot. And then, Matthew Nicholson's given them a really solid interior presence on that end of the floor. He ain't seen Zach Edey yet, but he has had to go against Jackson Davis and some other really talented bigs. So their win at Indiana was one of the more impressive wins of this season, because I think they only ended up winning by 1 was the final score, but they pretty much controlled that game throughout. And Indiana made a late run, but Northwestern, it's going to be a tough game. We're going to have to be really locked in and to be able to go on the road and get that one.
Now, going back to Iowa, just how tough will that Chris Murray matchup be for Caleb Furst and Mason Gillis, who are going to be most likely guarding him for the whole game?
Yeah, it's a tough matchup. That guy's a versatile scorer, can score pretty much at all 3 levels. He's going left pretty much every time. So, but like a lot of these talented guys, even though if they're going one way or the other, they oftentimes can still find a way to get back to that strong hand. But yeah, it's going to be a tough matchup for those guys. It's going to be, something that, I remember Ethan had a lot of success guarding Keegan Murray at times in the Big Ten tournament game when we played in the Big Ten tournament championship. So, I would presume that, Caleb or Mason will start on him, but on Chris Murray, but maybe we could go to Ethan that sometimes on Chris too. It'll be interesting to see if we go that route at all, but it's going to be a tough matchup. It's going to be something where from a team-wide standpoint, you really have to be keyed in on him, because one guy is probably going to struggle just to stop him one-on-one. So he can shoot the 3. He can really drive it. He's athletic, so he can really get on the offensive glass as well. So Purdue's going to have to be hooked up.
Rabrach has really impressed me too. I don't know how much of Iowa you've been able to watch, but he's kind of, I don't want to say come out of nowhere, but he's put it all together and turned into possibly an all Big Ten player, maybe on the 3rd team if he can sneak in there.
That's a good call. I have seen some of their more recent games, and you're right. He's been a problem. He is. He's always been a talented back to the basket guy, but you can tell just feeling more comfortable in their system and getting more opportunities. With Bohannon gone and Keegan Murray gone, he's probably their second option, I would say, offensively now, behind Chris Murray, and he's thriving. He can score with either hand around the basket. He's got good footwork, really good touch, can step out and make that little 15-footer on occasion. And he's someone that is a difficult matchup. I mean, if you try to just guard him one-on-one, Zach with his size might have a little more success than some other bigs. But for the most part, you try to guard him one-on-one in the post, that's a tough ask to stop him because he can go either way and he's got great touch. And so I presume, if he gets the ball on the block, Purdue will double big to big like we do, all those quality big men in the league, but he's not quite as versatile as Jackson Davis. Jackson Davis, we would double him, and then he had that ability to dribble out of the double
Yeah.
and then come downhill and attack you one-on-one after your double has left him. And, that's something that makes Jackson Davis so special. I'm not sure Rebracha's quite got that ability off the bounce. So hopefully, if we can get some good, strong doubles on him on the catch, we can knock him out of his game a little bit. But he's certainly been playing at a high level.
And last question for you. Who's a guy that you think is an X factor for this team continuing the success that they've had for most of the season, heading into this final stretch?
For Purdue or Iowa?
For Purdue, sorry.
For Purdue? No, you're fine. X factor for Purdue. Well, I think we've got really good contributions from our starting lineup, for the most majority of the season. I think, David Jenkins, the way he's been shooting the ball as of late, and then Mason Gillis, I think those two guys off the bench giving Purdue solid contributions game in, game out moving forward are big keys. Obviously everyone's got to play well, but I think those two guys being, offensive contributors and shooting the ball the way they have, I think if that continues, that really makes Purdue a tough team to guard. And, I think that would be something that moving forward would just make us extremely difficult to guard game in, game out if we're not only having Zach and the contributions from our starters, but if we have those guys coming off the bench, given production, I think that's something that would be a huge X factor for us moving forward.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. So you led into my next point. Brandon Newman, David Jenkins Jr., and Ethan Morton, they're combining for around 12 points a game in league play. And I just feel like, those guys can all, specifically Newman and David Jenkins Jr., those guys can both light it up. They can catch fire and score 12 points a game on their own. I think that's what Purdue's going to need, especially heading into the tournament, where they're going to need a guy off the bench that can go get them 10 to 12 points. No one really stops Edey, but if Lawyer or Smith or First or Gillis or whoever's kind of struggling, they're going to need someone to step up. And like you mentioned, I think David Jenkins Jr. could be that guy.
No question. If you're going to get fortunate enough to go on a run in March where you win hopefully 4 games to get to the Final Four and maybe even 6, of course, to win it all. Throughout the course of a run, you're going to need different guys to step up on different games, right? And so I remember, I think back to that Michigan team in 2013 that had that great run to the final. And, our boy Spike Albrecht, who ended up, wearing the black and gold his last year, he, was major league for them as a freshman on that team, coming off the bench, having moments in some different games. Of course, he has the great game against Louisville in the championship, but in some of those earlier games in the tournament, he came off the bench and hit big shots. And, shot making is massive in the tournament, and so you got to have a guy like a Brandon Newman or a Mason Gillis or a David Jenkins or even a Ethan Morton, hit some shots in timely moments just to be able to get through the rigors of a long run in March. So hopefully that's in our future.
Yeah, I thought the 2 threes David Jenkins Jr. hit in particular, I thought those were going to be a big momentum swing and possibly push Purdue into the lead. And like we kind of talked about earlier, just couldn't hit enough shots in crunch time, honestly, is what it boiled down to. And that happens sometimes.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. David hits those 2 threes, Mason hits one, Brandon Newman hits one. So that's 4 threes from your bench there in that little stretch where we really were finally able to take it from that double-digit deficit down to, 1 or 2 possessions. And I'm with you. Once those guys started raining those threes, and I was like, all right, we got these guys on the ropes. And give those guys credit, man. They stepped up and hit big shots, and we put that pressure on Indiana. We weren't ever quite able to get it tied or take the lead to, I think, really ramp that pressure up on them to hold off our squad. But it was exciting to see us get it going there shooting wise in the second half to get it close.
Well, hey, man, I'm going to wrap this thing up, let you go. As always, appreciate the time and best of luck. Keep up the good work, man.
All right, I appreciate that, man. Thanks for having me.